Hello, Georgetown. I'm Beverly Enos, and you're watching Spotlight Georgetown. You can find us Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. This is your cable TV show. This is your cable station. So if you want to participate, let me know. If you'd like to be interviewed, let me know. I'm always looking for interesting people that are doing something special in the town of Georgetown. Now, today we're talking to Chris Comiskey and Ed Desjardins.
Yep.
And we're talking about the Union Cemetery. We should probably do the show on Halloween, but
Right.
we may rerun it on Halloween.
We can do another one.
Okay, now, Chris, you are the president of the Historical Society.
That's right.
And Ed, you were the former president of the
President Chairman of the Historical Commission.
What is the difference between the society and the commission?
We get that question all the time. Beverly has a
Chris.
Beverly,
I'm
Chris has a private organization,
Okay.
and the Historical Commission is voted and appointed by the town.
Okay.
So it's a public group.
Okay, so the town actually, the commission is actually a piece of town government.
Exactly.
And the society is a nonprofit.
It's a private nonprofit.
Yep.
Okay, all right, we got that straight. It's always nice to do that. Now, we have two cemeteries in Georgetown. We have Harmony, which is still open,
Yep.
and we have Union. And Union Cemetery has been closed since the 1940s, I think you
40s, they sort of filled out the empty plots.
said. And as with anything, when we're talking about history, there's always two sides to every coin. So sometimes, you know, the details get a little lost, especially back in the 1500s
That's
and
right.
some of the early times.
Exactly.
So we'll be going over a little bit of things. So with that said, how old is the Union Cemetery?
1732.
1732.
Yeah, we go back quite a bit. I was going to I don't want to bore everyone with this is the document. It's some 102 pages that went to the state that got us from where the cemetery was built to the ownership or control by the Cemetery Commission years ago, eventually abandoned, and then picked up by a group of volunteers for a number of years. And then ultimately the Historical Commission, actually working with the Historical Society as well, managed to bring enough information together where we had to reinvent or reinstall the original documents so that we had an owner.
So Union is owned by the town,
That's correct.
and Harmony is run by a board of trustees, as I understand.
That's correct.
And we'll get to them another show. Can you give us a history from that date, briefly, to when it closed?
What I was going to do, or if you don't mind, I'd like to sort of start talking about the chronology of events that take us from the turnover of the ownership to the town of Georgetown, and then I can go over the specific dates and what
Don't
occurred
need
there.
specifics, just kind of
Just
give me
a
just a nice overview.
rough idea. As you know, we were very fortunate to receive community preservation funding, and what we would have done without the funds, I dare to say.
Right,
would
but
be
I'd like a
problem.
history of the
History of the town, of
cemetery
cemetery
first.
itself.
So it opened in what date?
Rated. I have to go back a little bit because the cemetery ultimately came out of the Rowley. Families from Rowley began to migrate to the western part and ultimately into Georgetown. Western part of Rowley was known as West Rowley, and this area of Rowley has no burying ground of its own back in the 1650s. People were buried either in Byfield or in Bradford at that time. Land was purchased on the corner of East Main Street and Pillsbury Lane in Georgetown, where there was a church was built just west of the Union Cemetery. And they discussed establishing a cemetery. There were, in July of 1732, Hannah Nelson died and was interred near the church on the land owned by her husband, Joseph Nelson. Richard Boynton, who died in December of 1732, was buried near Hannah Nelson. And that sort of was the makings of the cemetery. The same year, the church voted to purchase the easternmost portion of Union Cemetery, which is the older portion from Joseph Nelson, that included the burial grounds of 2 individuals.
Now, through the years, how many different times was this expanded by purchasing more land?
I would guess either 4 or 5. I had an indication of that, and I'll sort of touch
I can
base.
count it up for you while you're talking.
Okay. The one thing that is kind of interesting before, well, just after the cemetery opened, which is 1736 and 37, there was an enormous epidemic, by the way. 46 children died of what was called throat distemper back then,
I've got the
which is
information.
actually
I was gonna cover it.
diphtheria.
I'm going to that.
Okay, and I looked into that further to see what this epidemic involved, and
I think Chris is going to talk about that when she talks about
Okay.
certain sections of the
Haverhill,
stories.
Haverhill, though, is interesting because if we lost whatever 46 children, and we're not sure quite where the burial is, certainly it's on the early part of the cemetery. Haverhill lost 246 to the same plague, and there was over 1,500 that were lost children of very young age that were lost at that time.
Okay, now I see, as I drive by, I see pink ribbons and blue ribbons.
That's correct.
And I see a lot of people scurrying around and they're doing work. What are they doing, and what's the difference of the ribbons?
Right now, we had appropriated the sum of $47,750 for this first phase of the most endangered stones,
And this
which
is
are the earlier ones. CPC
this
funding,
is right.
again.
Community
thank goodness,
Preservation
funds.
Funds. So it doesn't come out of the tax budget.
That's correct.
It's coming out of money that we already have in the bank.
You got it.
Okay.
And with the blue ribbons indicate those stones that have already been worked on and are finished. They have 86 stones to do in their
Dollars for 86 stones.
86 stones, and many of them have to be dug up. You have to put in steel pins where those that are broken. You got to remember, this is 270 years old since the beginning to date, and there hasn't been a heck of a lot done over the centuries, on that. So.
So they're standing
doing
up the ones
major
that have
work.
fallen, and
Yeah, they're having to dig out the bases and reset those. Those that are broken, they have to put stainless steel pins in with an epoxy and put those back together. And you'll see a number of shots of those. That we have a before and after book that shows the extent of work and what's been done.
and they
it's
clean them up
amazing.
and
Oh yeah, they're usually covered with mold or lichen, and that has to be cleaned off and scraped off so that it's readable. Many of the stones are simply either not readable, or they're covered with growth and vegetation. And a lot of this, we had a separate contract for the Union Cemetery to get rid of invasives. And in some cases, they've covered the entire stone that wasn't even readable.
invasives being plant.
Plant material, yeah, that were planted, and maybe mom and dad put a little plant there back 150 years ago, and now it's an enormous tree or shrub that has shrouded the entire stone.
I've got a vine like that in my backyard. I swear. Now, so the pink ones are the ones that are still being worked
Still
on.
being worked on, yeah.
And how long is this process going to take?
They have about 6 or 7 more months. It was a 2-year process, and they've been working on it for about a year, almost a year and a half.
Because when they're in there, there's a whole bunch of people
Yeah.
all at once.
They
It's not
have
just one
5 or
2 people.
6. What they've done is trained a few college students that they tend to work with over the years, and a few other people on their staff. But the group that are in there working, Minxie Fannin and James Fannin, are some of the experts in the field, and they've done work. In fact, they're between here and work that they're doing out in the Midwest and Lexington and Concord and all around.
We got the best, huh?
We have the best, and they know what they're doing.
Now, what else has CPC done for the cemeteries? I know we've voted at town meeting
Yep.
many years of many different projects. So what else is the money going to?
Well, and some of the things we're doing. The Brocklebank Museum itself, we restored the the roof and some other areas of that. Erie Ford display case is another good one historically. But if I can touch on those in the Union Cemetery, a lot of people think that's one project that has gone on. It's taken 3 different sums of money to get grant 1, 2, and 3. The original grant called for the cast iron fence to be done for $45,000. So that was done in 2004. That's when we got the money. However, what's happened in the meantime, when they're ready to install the fence, naturally it goes to the town legal counsel, and you can't install a fence unless you get a permission from the owner. Now, who owns this cemetery? Technically, it started out as a town-owned. No, I'm sorry, privately owned.
Parish.
That's right.
The parish.
Okay.
And what had developed over the years, they lost the group that maintained it and took care of it and set the laws and regulations. Kept drifting off, and they never replenished their staff. And eventually, like you said earlier, in the 1940s or so, they sold the lots. People like Dick Thomas and the Meters, I think Al and Paul were volunteering hours and hours of the time. Bill Thomas spent about 16 years or so volunteering his time to try to keep it up. In the meantime, it went into a state of disrepair and abandoned at that point. So how do you find out who the owners are? No one else is existing. So that's where sort of Chris and Joe Knapp became very effective. They spent we started, like I said, in 2004, and this whole thing finally came to an end in 2008 as far as the town accepting it, going through the state with reams of information and photos and pictures. We were lucky in one case to have, I think a gentleman's name now that lives up on North Street. He was cleaning out his attic, and lo and behold, he came across a trunk loaded with early documents from the cemetery.
Oh, wow.
So he presented that to the Historical Society and to the Historical Commission. So that helped the folks put this documentation needed so that the town actually realized when it was formed.
Okay. So the CPC money went to the fence?
It went to the fence. That's one portion of it. But they would not accept the cemetery since they didn't have a master plan or how to manage it. So we ended up getting a separate management plan, which was came about in 07.
Was that with the CPC money as well?
That's correct,
Okay.
CPC. So to step back a bit, we got the first $45,000 for the fence, and like I say, you had to determine ownership at that point. We went from that to grant number 2, legal expenses and doing the research and stuff. And then to grant number 3, which was $27,000, because we ended up doing the fence that started in 04, completed that in 07. So in the meantime, 3 years had gone by, steel prices went up, the labor market went up. So we ended up spending a total of $77,000 for 750 lineal feet of cast iron. Now, we could have done it cheaper, but I think we
It's a
wanted...
gorgeous fence.
It is nice.
It really fits with the style of the very, very, very old cemetery.
Exactly.
It's kind of like, you into Disney World and the haunted house in the cemetery on the side.
Yeah, you got it.
So, Preservation Management Plan, Ed. Now, what is that?
Preservation Management Plan. I hate to keep scooping down here, but this is what the town paid $15,000 for, and it's a tremendous document that illustrates stone by stone what has to be done, what has to be repaired. And this was put together by the Fannons and the Layers. Those are the group that we hired to be the stone experts. and they go through very carefully, stone by stone, and you'll see some of these in the illustrations as you get on with the film that indicate.
So when was this done?
This was done in '07, I believe. Yes, May of '07. It was approved at the town meeting.
So we needed this to actually start the repair work.
Exactly.
Okay. So
So
that's
they
the
have
first.
something
That
to
was the
put-
first step.
Yeah, and then the town says, I need this also in order to, if you want to give it back to the town or donate it to the town, like we ended up doing. This is what the lawyers suggested. The state had a ruling that, a mandate actually, that any cemetery in the state that has been abandoned has to be taken over by the town.
Okay.
So now we
now we own
who's
it.
going to own it, exactly. So we did that, and then we've said, now that we've got this far, let's try to restore what has been sitting there for 270 years. So the first package, we said, let's take the earliest stone, which are losing their history, and many of them unrecognizable, and repair that. And we got this $47,750 to do that. And that's the called the Gravestone Restoration Project, and that was done in '09. So already we've gone from '04 to '09. So it's taken a long time, but it's been very,
Well, it's
nice movement.
very slow work because
It
you have
is.
to be careful to preserve the stone.
Exactly.
You don't want to just clean it up and lose the carvings and lose all of
Yep.
the dates and things like that. Now, the stones themselves, are they are granite stones or are they limestones?
Many of the earlier ones tend to be slate, and then we found there was a lot of marble also indicated. Now,
Okay.
one thing that they did come across, and we ended up getting another little bonus from the CPC, was the invasive removal. Like we mentioned, the growth in some cases, you couldn't even find the stones. They were completely hidden. So the highway department helped on that, by the way, and we were able to get some of those things, most of them removed, so at least it's readable now.
It's nice when the town works together like that.
Ah,
It's
exactly,
nice.
exactly.
Now, Chris, you've written a book about Cuffy Dole. We've
Yes.
talked about that before, but can you
Yep.
give us a brief why Cuffy Dole is so important to the town's history and what makes him so special?
Well, I think he's just one of the many interesting and special people in the cemetery. There's a legend about Cuffy, and then there's the uncovered truth about Cuffy, and they're two very separate things. And that's what I'm trying to educate people about. The old legend about Cuffy is he was a slave, a former slave, and when he died, because he was a black man, they didn't want to bury him in the cemetery with the white people and buried him outside. But research has turned out that's not true at all. In fact, it was a story that was fabricated around the 1960s. Earlier stories, including the earliest one I found, which wasn't mentioned in my book because I found it after I wrote the book, was by a man who actually knew Cuffy. He was alive during Cuffy's time, and he says Cuffy was buried in the cemetery.
Okay.
But so instead of feeling bad that Cuffy was buried outside, he was in fact buried he was segregated now. He was not among the white stones. His was in the corner of the cemetery away from the rest. But he was in the cemetery and was the first black person buried in the town to be honored with a gravestone. There were about, I think, a dozen slaves that were buried somewhere in town. We believe probably in the cemetery. They didn't get any stones, though.
So there are other graves there that have no stones.
That's probably a lot especially in the old section.
Okay, if they didn't have the money for a stone, they just bury the
Right.
body and put a
typically
wooden cross.
And typically a slave wouldn't bother putting
Right.
a stone for a slave.
Right. Okay. Who else is there?
Well,
mean-
I have some a few interesting people that I've pulled out if you want to hear about them, and also I can talk a little bit about the style of stones. Going to that first. Walking through Union is kind of a walk through time in gravestone carving. The earliest gravestones that you find around New England have what's called a death's head, which is a skull, often with wings. And this was typical of the 1600s and somewhat into the 1700s. We have a few of them in Union. And then the soul effigies became popular, and they are more of a face, a more pleasant-looking face rather than the creepy skull. And they also have a wing. Soul effigy, what it represents is the soul of the departed rising up to heaven. And these were popular throughout most of the 1700s. And then around 1800, there's a big change in carvings, and the willow and urn become popular. So when we move from the earliest part of the cemetery up to the 1805 purchase, which was one of the next purchases, the big change. You see all these willow and urns on stone after stone after stone. And this remained popular to about the mid-1800s, and then it became kind of an anything goes. As you go into the newer, the 1845 section, every style imaginable. The big obelisks became popular, the big tall stones, fancier carvings, lambs became popular for children. You see little reclining lambs in the cemetery. That would be a child's grave. So by the later 1800s, it was just wide variety. And you can see that as you drive by the cemetery, the different styles as you go by, they change. And as you walk through, you can see those. And epitaphs were also popular in the earlier days, and those, I love epitaphs. That's my favorite part.
Can I make just one point, because a lot of people don't realize that some of the outstanding stone carvers in the entire New England area are right here in the Raleigh-Georgetown area. And they're absolutely gorgeous. When these people were doing their research and putting this preservation document management plan together, they had never seen any of them and with this quality and this. They're some of the biggest names in terms of stone carvers. So we're very fortunate.
Yeah.
So I want to give you just a little example of an epitaph.
Okay.
And this is one that I used to begin my Halloween tour. I do a Halloween cemetery tour, and it's Tragedies and Tombstones. And it's about tragic deaths in Georgetown. And I have a sprinkling of witches and ghosts too. So
she does it over the Halloween season
yeah,
too.
it's at Halloween. So this is it, and I start my tour with this one. It's death is a sentence passed on all. By his fatal stroke, you soon must fall. Repent of sin if happy you would be. Prepare for death, for you must follow me.
Ooh, I don't know. That's
And I have somebody dressed up as the Grim Reaper who appears at that point.
You have the smoke and the woo.
No, I don't have any smoke. I wish I had some smoke. Anyhow, did you want me to touch on a few of the interesting people? Well, as you drive by the cemetery, probably most people have noticed what's commonly called anyway, a tabletop grave in the old section. It's like a big box. It's fairly near the street. And that's the grave of James Chandler, the first minister here in town. He came to the town in 1732, 26-year-old, and was the minister at the church. Wow. And his epitaph, I'll read that one, is, beneath the horrors of this tomb we've placed our pastor's dear remains to rest in silence here, till the last trumpet shall be blown by the Eternal's high command to bid the world draw near. Then shall he wake to sweet surprise, and join the saints above the skies to sing in triumph there. And now this gets into a Puritan belief, and that is that at the final judgment day, Christ is going to rise in the east, and all his followers are going to rise up out of the grave to greet him. So in the early days, most graves most graves faced east because they wanted to see when he arrived, when they're going to rise up to greet him. So his and most of the early graves are facing east.
That's interesting.
And that's the part about the trumpets and risings and such. Now behind...
Okay.
You don't like that?
Oh, I love it.
Now, how long would it take them to carve a stone? I mean, all the letters that go into that, those all have to be hand carved.
Oh, yeah.
That would have to take
No idea.
They're sheets
months.
of slate. They would rough out the stone itself, and then, like you say, it was a lot of hand carving.
Yeah,
Well,
and very artistic. They didn't just... You would think with that much work they might just do the names and the dates, but these are very intricately carved stones. They're very beautiful. They're works of art, many of them.
Wow. Okay. Somebody else?
Oh, I got a few. Yep, the throat distemper, and touched on that a bit. They are mostly in the area right behind Chandler's grave. There are several stones that are still visible. Some we don't know if they never got stones or they may have simply fallen down and gotten buried because
they could have been wood also, and that's
yeah,
possible. Just
because so many children were dying during that time, not only in the West Parish, which is now known as Georgetown, but all over. The stone carvers couldn't keep up with it. So we lost 46 children just in the West Parish area within 8 months.
Oh, wow.
There were some families that lost every child.
1,500 sort of in the district or in the area. I mean, that's number of young
what
children.
What year was this?
1736 to 37. 8-month period.
Yeah.
There were some families lost as many as 5 children here in this parish within weeks of each other. Hard to even imagine.
Yeah, it is.
Hard to even imagine.
Plus, then you get into the farmland in those days.
That's right.
And without the children, how did they manage to maintain
That's a good question.
their home and their farmland and everything else?
Yep.
So
Very
it's not just
difficult.
that the children died; they lost a lot of whatever
Oh,
else
yeah,
went on
it was
in the world.
devastating.
And
it
several
was just-
families lost many members of the family. There may
Yeah.
have been 3 or 4 children.
Yeah,
which is-
and very close together, sometimes the same day even. I mean,
Yeah.
I have many tragic stories with that one. I'm not going to tell them today. Cuffy Doe, I already mentioned that, so I can go over him. Reverend Isaac Brayman, I think, is one of the more interesting stones in the cemetery. He was the 2nd minister of the church, and he served for 61 years.
Wow.
Wow.
Very beloved man. And his stone is in the shape of a church pulpit with an open Bible sitting on top of it. It's very beautiful, very unique marble stone, and I'll have a picture of that to show. And then I think one of our more interesting characters, and he's on one of my tours, is Theodore Eliot. He lived in what is now the King Davis building in the square.
Okay.
He was an abolitionist. He was extremely active in the local anti-slavery society and the Essex County Anti-Slavery Society. He was involved in the Underground Railroad. His house was a depot in the Underground Railroad. He entertained some of the more popular, well-known people of the time that were in the movement, including William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, a lot of people are not aware, appeared here in Georgetown and spoke on at least 2 occasions. And Theodore Eliot was his host during that time. So he was involved in that for a while, and then he caught California fever. It wasn't quite a 49er, he went in 51. But he went out, he was married, he had a child, but he left wife and son home and took off for California for 7 years. Came back for a year and a half,
Nice guy.
went back out for another 7 years, and then after that, for the rest of his life, it was pretty much every 2 years. He was out in California, and then he would come back. And I have a little clip from a newspaper that tells about him, and it gives the impression, I kind of picture a Clint Eastwood sort of person here. Let me read this. It says he liked to tell stories of the struggles for law and order in California. He was always on the side of law and order, temperance and liberty, and if the corrupt courts of the new state did not afford protection, he was one of those that would relieve those reluctant bodies from the task of punishing criminals.
Okay.
So he's kind of an interesting story, and that's just some of the.
You said something about a witch?
Oh, you want? Yeah, I didn't write that one down, but I can go into that. Yeah, this on my cemetery tour now. Most of the people I talk about on tours, I have actual historic documents, backing up what I'm talking about. But on my Halloween tour, I have a few legends too, and this one would definitely fall under legend. There's Elizabeth Clowlin, who died in the early 1800s, and neighbors believed she was a witch. At night, they could hear screaming and wild, blasphemous incantations coming from her house, they claimed. Nobody liked her. She looked like a witch, gray hair, which just stuck out in all directions and looked like it never seen a comb. And so she wasn't a very popular person around town. And like witches usually did, she had a black cat. And of course, there was a belief in those days that witches had what they called familiars. They would have a creature, like a black cat, and they could kind of turn themselves into that creature so they could creep around at night, spy on neighbors, or go to their witches' meetings or whatever. So she had this very, very nasty black cat, and it was the terror of the neighborhood, attacked children, and was just a horrible creature. So one day this nasty black cat got into a neighbor's house, bit the woman, and then went running around her kitchen, knocking things over, breaking things, and just making a general mess. So the woman screamed. Her husband comes running in, sees this nasty cat, and he grabs a pair of tongs, grabs the cat, and shoves it into the fire. Kills it. Kills the cat, burns it to a crisp. Tragic. So anyhow, but my tour is not about dead cats. So later that same day, keep in mind the thing about the familiars. Later that same day, Peter Clowlin returns home and finds his wife on the floor, dead, burnt to a crisp.
Oh my God.
Coincidence?
See?
Oh, the
Yeah.
neighbors didn't think so. Now, separate fact from fiction. Fact is, Elizabeth Clowland did indeed burn to death. That is a fact. The story, however, came from a newspaper many years later. So we have to call it more of a legend of Georgetown. I can't verify that any of that is factual, but she did burn to death.
Now you do history tours and then you do the Halloween tours.
That's right.
Now when do the history tours run?
I vary. Sometimes I do. I haven't even decided I should be advertising. I usually do them during Georgetown days.
Yeah,
I haven't figured out what I'm doing for that yet, and I should soon. Last couple of years, I've done Harmony during Georgetown days. I think I might do Union again this year, and then I do my Halloween tour the 2 weekends before Halloween.
Okay, that sounds interesting. That sounds like. Now, how do people contact you to get involved or find the times, or is it in the paper?
In the newspaper,
Advertise,
in
yeah.
Georgetown Fun,
Put it on
our
cable?
website.
Yeah, cable.
Cable, yeah.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
I've
Put it on the
done that.
station?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, we have, just so you know, the total quantity in Union Cemetery is about 500 stones. So we're trying to restore something in the neighborhood of, or that needs restoration, about 370 some odd. So
Wow, that's a lot of them.
yeah, some of them are damaged more than others, and it'll cost more to repair. That's why we spent so much on this first round, the 47,000, because these were the oldest, and 90% of them were those that were installed in the 1700s. So we go from 1732 all the way up to 1800.
And this has been great for my tour because one of my historical tours, I brought people to the grave, the first grave in the cemetery, Hannah Nelson, and I pointed out this is the oldest grave, this is the grave of Hannah Nelson, and people said, how can you tell? And it was because of some very old research done by Sidney Purley in the 1800s, which pinpointed where her grave was. You know, you really had to study it to see, oh, there's an H and an A, and you know, I could pick out a few letters, but now you can actually read.
Yeah, they're restoring this. It's so nice to be able to look in, go into the cemetery and read the stones and see the nice carvings.
Some of the ones were ones that I used on my tour, and they just look wonderful now, where you could barely read them before.
Thanks to the CPC, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Still kind of creepy thinking about walking around in a cemetery. Is the cemetery open all the time for people to just walk in and around?
You can do that.
Do rubbings, things like that?
We prefer not rubbings.
Yeah, done wrong, they can damage the stone. Particularly
exactly.
the old stones are very fragile.
Oh,
Some
good.
of them they could
Glad
chip.
I said something.
Yeah, we
that's a
prefer
good point.
to have people take photographs.
Take a photograph.
A good way to photograph that I have found, if you can't get a good picture, is wet the stone, and that makes the lettering stand out much better.
And sometimes the way the light hits it in a certain direction will cause a shadow in the carvings and stuff that make it more legible.
Okay. Did we miss anything?
I didn't.
I think we've got just about most of it. And fortunately, like I say, it took a number of years for this to happen, but I think it was well worth the 4 or 5 years that went into it, and the research that Chris did along with Joe Knapp. We got it done.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you both for coming.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beverly.
Thank you. I'll probably see you again doing
Yes.
something else in the show.
Right.
You always I have people that I always invite back because you do such a good job and have
Good.
so much information.
Thanks.
If you feel like going for a walk in the graveyard, visit Union and take a look at the stones and see what's there. I'm Beverly Enos. This is Spotlight Georgetown, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Thank you for joining us today, and bye for now.